My name is Stephanie Williams, and I'm 34 years old. 3 months ago, I lost my 7-year-old son Ethan to leukemia, and my heart still breaks every morning when I wake up. As if that pain wasn't enough, my parents couldn't be bothered to attend his funeral. But they sure found time to show up at my door weeks later, demanding access to Ethan's $850,000 trust fund left by my husband's parents, all for my sister Brittany's extravagant wedding. Before I continue with this heartbreaking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to family who crossed an unforgivable line. Growing up in the Williams household, I always knew my place, second best to my younger sister Brittany, who's now 26. Our parents, Roger and Diana, made no secret of their favoritism. While this might sound like typical sibling rivalry, the pattern was consistent and damaging throughout our childhood. When Brittany turned 8, my parents rented a bouncy castle, hired a magician, and invited the entire neighborhood. For my 8th birthday just 2 years earlier, I got a homemade cake and was allowed to invite 3 friends for a sleepover. This wasn't about finances, it was about priorities. School achievements followed the same pattern. My All-A report card earned a nod and maybe a good job, while Brittany's B average prompted elaborate praise and rewards. When I made the honor roll, it was expected. When Brittany finally did the same in high school, my parents took her on a weekend trip to celebrate. The disparity continued into our teenage years. I needed a job at 16 to pay for my own car insurance and gas. Meanwhile, Brittany received a brand new car for her 16th birthday with all expenses covered. When I accidentally backed into a mailbox, I paid for repairs from my own savings. When Brittany totaled her first car, our parents immediately replaced it, telling her accidents happen, sweetheart. Despite this uneven treatment, I focused on building my own life. I worked hard in school, earning partial scholarships that, combined with student loans and part-time jobs, put me through state university. Brittany, naturally, had her full ride to a private college paid for by our parents, even though her grades were mediocre at best. It was during my sophomore year at university that I met Michael. He was studying engineering while I pursued education. We connected in the campus coffee shop when we both reached for the same textbook in the reference section. Unlike the conditional affection I'd grown up with, Michael's love was steadfast and unconditional. He saw me, really saw me, and valued me for exactly who I was. Michael came from a wealthy family, but you'd never know it from his humble demeanor. His parents, Elizabeth and Robert, had built a successful construction business from the ground up. They welcomed me into their family with open arms, never once making me feel like I wasn't good enough. Elizabeth would often tell me she'd always wanted a daughter, and in me, she'd found one. When Michael and I married after graduation, my parents attended but complained about the venue being too far from their home. Brittany, serving as a reluctant bridesmaid, spent most of the reception talking about her own future wedding plans. Michael's parents, meanwhile, gifted us the down payment for our first home. The true transformation in my life came 7 years ago when I gave birth to Ethan. The moment I held him, I understood what unconditional love truly meant. With his father's dark hair and my green eyes, Ethan was perfect. Michael's parents were smitten, visiting regularly and establishing a trust fund for Ethan's future. The initial deposit of $250,000 grew substantially through wise investments. My parents, however, visited briefly when Ethan was born, then made excuses about being too busy to babysit or attend his birthday parties. They always had time for Brittany's dance recitals or art shows, though. When Ethan took his first steps at 10 months, I excitedly called my mother, who cut the conversation short because she was helping Brittany shop for an apartment. As Ethan grew, so did his personality, curious, kind, and remarkably empathetic for a child. He loved dinosaurs, space, and anything to do with the ocean. Michael and I created the childhood I wished I'd had, one filled with encouragement, adventure, and the constant reassurance that he was loved exactly as he was. While my relationship with my parents remained distant, Brittany's entitlement grew. She expected our parents to fund her lifestyle, designer clothes, international vacations, and rent for her luxury apartment. They complied without hesitation. When she complained about something, they fixed it. When she wanted something, they provided it. It was no surprise when Brittany met Ryan, her now fiancé, at a country club fundraiser. Ryan came from money too, but his parents apparently believed in financial independence. This created a problem for Brittany, who expected a wedding that would outshine every other in their social circle. While Ryan's parents offered to contribute a reasonable sum, it wasn't enough for Brittany's champagne dreams. Naturally, she turned to our parents, who, despite being comfortable rather than wealthy, immediately began liquidating investments to fund her demands. All of this family drama took a back seat when our world shattered 2 years ago. Ethan was 5 years old when we received the diagnosis that would change everything: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The day we learned about Ethan's leukemia remains etched in my memory with cruel clarity. It began with unexplained bruising and fatigue that we initially attributed to his active lifestyle. When a low-grade fever persisted for over a week, we took him to his pediatrician, Dr. Lawrence, who ordered blood tests just to be thorough. The call came the next day. Dr. Lawrence's usually cheerful voice was solemn as he asked us to come in immediately to discuss Ethan's results. I remember gripping Michael's hand so tightly as we sat in the sterile office, listening to terms like blast cells and bone marrow aspiration. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the doctor said, as the floor seemed to drop from beneath me. The good news is that the survival rates for children are much higher than they once were. With aggressive treatment, Ethan has a fighting chance. Fighting chance. Those words echoed in my head as we drove home in silence, Ethan napping in his car seat, blissfully unaware that his little body was at war with itself. That evening, after putting Ethan to bed with extra stories and cuddles, I called my parents. I could barely form the words through my tears. "Mom, it's Ethan. He has leukemia." There was a pause on the line before my mother responded, "Oh, that's terrible, honey. But children bounce back from these things, don't they? I'm sure the doctors know what they're doing." No offer to come over. No, how can we help? Just platitudes followed by a quick pivot to Brittany's promotion at her marketing job. Michael's parents, by contrast, arrived at our door the next morning, having driven through the night from 3 states away. Elizabeth wrapped me in a hug that somehow contained all the compassion my own mother had failed to offer. "We're here," she said simply. "Whatever you need, for as long as you need it." Robert, usually stoic, had tears in his eyes as he clasped Michael's shoulder. "Son, you focus on your boy. Work can wait." They stayed for 2 weeks, helping with everything from cooking meals to researching the best oncologists in the country. When they reluctantly returned home, they called daily and arranged to visit monthly. My parents visited once, briefly, when Ethan was first admitted to the hospital to begin treatment. They stayed for 45 uncomfortable minutes, keeping their distance from his bed as if leukemia might be contagious. My mother flinched when Ethan asked if she wanted to see his new teddy bear, the one a nurse had given him for being brave during his first chemotherapy session. "We can't stay long," my father explained. "Your mother has a garden club meeting, and there's traffic to consider." As for Brittany, she sent a text, "Sorry about Ethan. Hope he feels better soon," as if he had a cold rather than cancer. She never visited once during the entire 2-year battle. The treatment regimen was brutal. Induction therapy with intense chemotherapy left Ethan violently ill, his little body ravaged by the very medicine meant to save him. I quit my teaching job to be with him full-time, while Michael arranged to work remotely whenever possible. Hospital stays became our new normal. I learned to sleep in a chair by Ethan's bed, to interpret every beep of the monitors, to advocate fiercely when a shift change meant details were missed. I memorized medication names, dosages, and side effects better than some of the medical students on rotation. Through it all, Ethan showed a resilience that humbled me. When his hair fell out in clumps, he named himself Captain Smooth and asked for superhero beanies instead of wigs. When nausea kept him from eating, he would insist I describe my meals in detail so he could eat with his imagination. "Mom," he said one evening as I read him Harry Potter during an extended hospital stay, "if I have to be sick, I'm glad I have you to be sick with me." I broke down in the hallway afterward, where Michael found me and held me without words. There were moments of hope. 6 months into treatment, Ethan achieved remission. We celebrated cautiously, knowing the protocol required continued maintenance therapy. For a while, we dared to believe we might be among the lucky ones. During this period, my parents called occasionally but always had reasons why they couldn't visit. Brittany was stressed about work. They were renovating the kitchen. The weather was bad for driving. Meanwhile, Michael's parents rotated visits, so one of them was with us almost every other week, providing not just emotional support but practical help, grocery shopping, handling insurance paperwork, and sometimes just giving Michael and me a few hours to sleep in a real bed. The strain on our marriage was inevitable but never divisive. There were tense moments born of fear and exhaustion, but we never lost sight of what mattered: each other and our beautiful boy fighting for his life. If anything, adversity forged our bond into something unbreakable. A year into treatment, the cancer returned. More aggressive this time. The oncologist, Dr. Chen, presented options with compassionate frankness. A bone marrow transplant offered the best chance, but finding a match would be challenging. Neither Michael nor I were compatible. My parents reluctantly agreed to be tested but weren't matches. Brittany flatly refused, claiming a fear of needles. It was a national registry that eventually identified a potential donor, giving us renewed hope. Before the transplant could proceed, however, a complication arose. Ethan developed a serious infection that delayed the procedure and further weakened his system. It was the beginning of a downward spiral that, despite every medical intervention available, we could not reverse. The conversation with Dr. Chen that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Michael and I sat in her office, holding hands so tightly our knuckles were white, as she gently explained that Ethan's body was no longer responding to treatment. "The cancer has become resistant to the chemotherapy protocols," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "And his system is too compromised now for the bone marrow transplant to be viable. I believe we've reached a point where we need to discuss quality of life rather than curative measures." The world stopped spinning. I heard Michael make a sound I'd never heard before, something between a gasp and a moan. I felt oddly calm, floating outside myself as Dr. Chen continued talking about palliative care options and bringing Ethan home. "How long?" Michael managed to ask. "It's difficult to say precisely," she replied. "Possibly a few months. Maybe less." Less. The word echoed in my head. Less time. Less future. Less Ethan. I called my parents that evening, my voice mechanical as I relayed the prognosis. My mother sighed into the phone. "That's just awful, Stephanie. We'll try to visit soon, but your father has that conference next week, and then we're helping Brittany look at wedding venues the week after." I stopped listening, a strange detachment settling over me. It was as if a final thread had snapped, severing whatever familial connection remained. Michael's parents arrived the next day. Elizabeth took over the kitchen, ensuring we all ate, while Robert made calls to arrange a medical bed and necessary equipment for Ethan to come home. They moved into our guest room without discussion, creating a buffer between us and the practical world that allowed Michael and I to focus entirely on Ethan. We brought him home on a Thursday. The hospital staff lined the hallway as we left, many in tears. Ethan had charmed everyone with his humor and courage, collecting surrogate aunts and uncles among the nurses and technicians who had cared for him. At home, we created what Ethan called his command center in the living room. The medical bed was positioned to see out the large window to the backyard and bird feeders beyond. We hung fairy lights around the ceiling and covered the walls with his artwork and posters of space, dinosaurs, and ocean creatures. Knowing time was precious, we focused on making each day meaningful. When Ethan felt strong enough, we took short outings, to the aquarium where the staff opened early to give him a private behind-the-scenes tour, to the planetarium where he marveled at the stars he so loved, to the beach where he could feel the sand between his toes one last time. On days when he couldn't leave bed, we brought the world to him. Michael's colleague from engineering brought a virtual reality headset that allowed Ethan to swim with dolphins. My former teaching assistant organized a parade of Ethan's kindergarten classmates who marched past our house with signs and songs. Through it all, Ethan maintained a wisdom that belied his 7 years. One evening, as I sat beside him reading, he set his hand on mine. "Mom, I know I'm not getting better," he said, his voice small but steady. I froze, the book trembling in my hands. We'd been careful to maintain hope in our conversations with him, though we'd never lied. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" I managed to ask. "I can feel it," he replied simply. "It's okay. I'm not scared." "You're not?" He shook his head. "Grandpa Robert said that when people die, they become part of everything. Like energy that changes form. I think I'll be stars. Will you look for me in the stars, Mom?" I promised him I would, as tears streamed down my face. He reached up to wipe them away. "Don't be sad too long, okay? I want you to be happy again someday." The decline, when it came, was swifter than we'd anticipated. One morning, Ethan woke with increased pain and difficulty breathing. His skin had a grayish tinge that sent ice through my veins. Dr. Chen had prepared us for this possibility but mentioned it might be weeks away. Michael called Dr. Chen while I held Ethan, trying to keep my expression calm as panic clawed inside me. This couldn't be happening yet. We weren't ready. We'd never be ready. I asked Michael to call my parents while Dr. Chen was en route. He left messages on both their phones, the urgency clear in his voice. "Ethan has taken a turn. If you want to say goodbye, you need to come now." Elizabeth contacted her and Robert's pastor, who arrived within the hour. Michael's parents moved quietly around us, managing the practical details while giving us space with our son. Dr. Chen arrived and administered medication to ease Ethan's discomfort, her eyes reflecting our pain. My parents never called back. Later, we would discover they'd been hosting a surprise engagement party for Brittany that day. As afternoon faded into evening, Ethan's breathing became more labored. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes smiling at something only he could see. During one lucid moment, he looked at Michael and me with perfect clarity. "I love you to the stars and back," he whispered, using our family saying. "We love you to the stars and back," we replied in unison, our voices breaking. Shortly after midnight, with Michael and me holding each of his hands, our beautiful boy took his last breath. It was peaceful, the kind of gentle passing that offers the smallest mercy in unbearable loss. He simply exhaled and didn't inhale again, his face relaxed as if in sleep. The silence that followed was deafening. The week between Ethan's death and his funeral exists in my memory as a blur of surreal moments. I moved through each day as if underwater, sounds muffled and movements slowed. Michael functioned as my anchor, his grief as profound as mine but somehow channeled into ensuring we honored our son exactly as he would have wanted. Elizabeth and Robert handled most of the arrangements, shielding us from the clinical details that would have shattered what little composure we maintained. They contacted the funeral home, coordinated with the cemetery where we'd purchased a plot beneath a maple tree, and gently guided us through necessary decisions. I called my parents the morning after Ethan died, my voice hollow as I informed them of their grandson's passing. My mother's response was a study in self-absorption. "Oh, Stephanie, that's just terrible," she said, sounding distracted. "Your father and I were just talking about how we might be able to visit next month." When I mentioned the funeral would be that Saturday, there was a telling pause. "This Saturday? Oh dear, that's the same day as Brittany's engagement party. We've already put down non-refundable deposits, and guests are flying in from out of state." I felt nothing as she continued explaining why they couldn't possibly reschedule the party or split up so one of them could attend their grandson's funeral. The emotional well was empty. I'd spent every tear, every feeling, every expectation on people who had consistently proven they didn't deserve them. "I understand," I said flatly, and hung up. It was only later, when I found the social media invitation to Brittany's surprise engagement celebration, clearly planned weeks in advance, that the final piece of familial connection withered. They had chosen, with clear eyes and full knowledge of Ethan's condition, To schedule their golden child celebration during what they must have known would likely be their grandson's final days or immediate aftermath. The morning of the funeral dawned with a gentle rain that cleared to reveal a vibrant rainbow, Ethan's favorite natural phenomenon. I chose to see it as his signature across the sky. The service itself was a testament to how many lives our little boy had touched in his brief 7 years. His teachers spoke of his insatiable curiosity. Hospital staff recounted his courage and the way he comforted other children in the oncology ward. His little friends shared simple memories of playing dinosaurs and building sandcastles. Michael read a poem about stars, his voice steady until the final line when it broke beautifully. I had prepared to read a letter but found myself unable to speak when the moment came. Robert stepped forward silently, taking the paper from my trembling hands and reading my words with such care that they still sounded like they came from my heart. The absence of my parents and sister created a visible void. People noticed, exchanging glances when they realized no maternal grandparents were present. Michael's jaw tightened whenever someone innocently asked about my family, but he maintained composure, deflecting questions with practiced grace. Throughout the service, I found myself fluctuating between profound grief and searing anger. How could they not be here? What commitment could possibly supersede saying goodbye to a child who had loved them despite their indifference? After the cemetery, we gathered at our home where friends and family had arranged a celebration of Ethan's life. The living room, still containing the hospital bed we hadn't had the heart to remove, was transformed with blue and green balloons, Ethan's favorites, and poster boards displaying photos from happier times. Children were encouraged to draw pictures of their memories with Ethan, creating an impromptu gallery that captured his spirit better than any formal memorial could have. In the kitchen, someone had arranged dinosaur-shaped cookies and star-patterned cupcakes. During this gathering, I found momentary solace and community. Michael's arm remained constant around my waist, tethering me when grief threatened to sweep me away. His parents moved through the house ensuring everyone had what they needed, graciously accepting condolences that should have been shared with my family too. As evening approached and guests began to leave, Elizabeth gently suggested we should discuss what to do with Ethan's trust fund. I'd nearly forgotten about the money, so inconsequential in the face of our loss. "There's no rush," Robert assured us. "But when you're ready, we've set it up so you have complete discretion over how it's used." Michael and I sat at our kitchen table that night after everyone had gone, the house eerily quiet without the medical equipment's constant hum. We talked about using part of the trust to establish a research foundation for pediatric cancer. Another portion would fund a scholarship in Ethan's name at the elementary school he'd attended too briefly. "He would have liked that," Michael said, his first smile in days ghosting across his face. "Using his legacy to help other kids." We decided to take time before finalizing any decisions. The money could wait, our healing couldn't be rushed. That week passed in a fog of grief punctuated by the painful process of acknowledging Ethan's absence. His empty chair at the breakfast table. The dinosaur toothbrush in the bathroom. The incomplete Lego spacecraft on his desk that he'd never finish building. Not once did my parents call to check on us after the funeral. No text messages, no cards, nothing. The silence from my family was complete, until it wasn't. Exactly 3 weeks after we laid Ethan to rest, the doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. Michael was in the shower, and I was sitting in Ethan's room, finally finding the courage to sort through some of his things. When I opened the front door, I found myself face to face with my parents and Brittany. For one bewildering moment, I thought they'd finally come to offer condolences. My mother held a gift bag with tissue paper poking out the top. My father clutched a folder of some kind. Brittany stood slightly behind them, examining her manicure. "Stephanie, darling," my mother said, air-kissing near my cheek as she pushed past me into the house. "We've been so worried about you, shutting yourself away like this." I stood frozen in the doorway as my father patted my shoulder awkwardly and Brittany offered a perfunctory hug that barely made contact. "You didn't return our calls," my father said, though neither of my parents had called even once. I followed them into the living room in a daze as they made themselves comfortable on the couch. My mother set the gift bag on the coffee table and smiled encouragingly. "We brought you a little pick-me-up," she said. "That lovely bath set you always admired from my bathroom. I thought it might help you relax." I stared at the bag, unable to process the inadequacy of the gesture. A bath set. For the loss of my child. "How are you holding up, sis?" Brittany asked, her tone suggesting she was completing a required social nicety rather than expressing genuine concern. "I'm managing," I replied automatically, the words hollow. An uncomfortable silence followed, during which no one mentioned Ethan. No one asked to see his room or his pictures. No one spoke his name. My father cleared his throat and opened the folder he'd brought. "Actually, Stephanie, we wanted to discuss something important with you. A family matter." I noticed my mother shoot him a warning glance, as if suggesting he was approaching the topic too quickly. "We understand that Ethan had a substantial trust fund," he continued, pulling out what appeared to be printed bank statements. Elizabeth mentioned it was quite significant. The shift in my awareness was immediate and jarring. Suddenly, I understood exactly why they had come. "Now that the money is available," my father said, choosing his words carefully, "we thought it would be appropriate to discuss how it might benefit the whole family." My mother jumped in, her voice soothing as if explaining something to a child. "What your father means, dear, is that Brittany's wedding is coming up in 6 months, and the expenses are becoming rather overwhelming." Brittany straightened, her expression brightening for the first time since arriving. "I've had to compromise on so many things already," she lamented. "The venue I really wanted was booked, and the designer dress I had my heart set on is just out of reach financially." I looked between their 3 faces, searching for any sign that this was some sort of grief-induced hallucination. There was none. They were entirely serious. "Let me understand," I said slowly. "You want Ethan's trust fund money to pay for Brittany's wedding?" "Not all of it, of course," my mother clarified quickly. "Just enough to make her day truly special. Around $200,000 should cover everything we've planned." $200,000. For flowers that would wilt and cake that would be eaten and photographs of a celebration for someone who couldn't be bothered to visit her dying nephew once. "Ethan would have wanted his aunt to have a beautiful wedding," my father added, as if invoking my dead son's wishes would somehow make this request reasonable. Something inside me that had been teetering on the edge finally broke free. A laugh escaped me, a harsh, brittle sound that held no humor. "You have no idea what Ethan would have wanted," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You barely knew him. You visited him exactly once during 2 years of illness. You couldn't even attend his funeral because your precious Brittany's engagement party was more important." My mother's face hardened. "That's not fair, Stephanie. We explained about the non-refundable deposits." "Not fair?" The words came out as a whisper before building to a shout. "Not fair? My son is dead. He suffered through pain you couldn't imagine while you were picking out centerpieces." I heard the bathroom door open upstairs, followed by Michael's quick footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, hair still damp, expression shifting from confusion to anger as he took in the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked, moving immediately to my side. "They want Ethan's trust fund money," I explained, my voice shaking. "For Brittany's wedding." Michael's face went completely blank, the expression I'd learned meant he was containing rage. "You can't be serious." "Now, Michael," my father began in his businessman voice, "this is a family discussion about assets that belong to my son," Michael interrupted flatly. "Left to him by my parents." "But he's gone now," Brittany said, her tone suggesting she was being the reasonable one. "And I'm here, and my wedding is going to be ruined if I can't afford the Swarovski crystal centerpieces and the designer cake. What good is all that money just sitting there when it could make a difference?" I stared at my sister, truly seeing her for perhaps the first time. The entitlement, the self-absorption, the complete lack of empathy, all cultivated by our parents' lifelong favoritism. "Get out," I said quietly. My mother gasped. "Stephanie. That's no way to speak to family. After all we've done for you." And there it was. The trigger that unleashed decades of suppressed anger. "What exactly have you done for me?" I demanded. "When have you ever put me first? When have you ever chosen me over Brittany? You couldn't even come to your grandson's funeral. We've always treated you girls equally," my father insisted, though his eyes couldn't meet mine. "You know that's not true," I countered. "It's never been true. But this, asking for my dead son's money for her wedding, this crosses a line I didn't even know existed." Brittany stood up, tears suddenly appearing on cue. "I just wanted one perfect day. Is that too much to ask? After everything I've been through?" "What exactly have you been through, Brittany?" Michael asked, his voice cold. "Please, enlighten us." "The stress of planning this wedding has been overwhelming," she whined. "And now I have to deal with Ethan's death, making everything awkward and depressing when this should be the happiest time of my life." The room fell silent. Even my parents looked uncomfortable with her phrasing. "I think it's time for you to leave," Michael said, moving toward the front door and opening it pointedly. My father stood, gathering his papers with jerky movements. "You're making a mistake, Stephanie. That money is part of our family's resources now, and legally." "Legally, you have no claim to it whatsoever," Michael interrupted. "The trust was established by my parents with explicit terms. But by all means, consult a lawyer if you'd like to waste more money." "This isn't over," my father threatened, his voice low. "You owe this family after everything we've done." "We owe you nothing," I replied, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Please leave and don't come back." My mother grabbed her purse, her face flushed with anger. "You've always been selfish, Stephanie. Always thinking about yourself." The irony of her statement might have made me laugh if I weren't so devastated. They filed out the door, Brittany shooting one last tearful glare over her shoulder before flouncing to the car. As the door closed behind them, my legs gave way. Michael caught me before I hit the floor, and together we sank to the entryway tiles. The sobs that tore from my chest held decades of pain, not just grief for Ethan, but mourning for the family I'd never truly had. "I've got you," Michael whispered against my hair. "I've always got you." In that moment, broken on the floor of our too-quiet house, I understood that family had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with love. My real family was holding me, had always held me, even when the world fell apart. The day after my parents' visit, the text messages began. First from extended family members, then from family friends, all variations on the same theme: I was being selfish. I was denying my sister her dream wedding out of spite. I was letting grief make me bitter. It became clear that my parents had launched a campaign, presenting themselves as victims of my unreasonable behavior. Their version conveniently omitted their absence at Ethan's funeral and twisted their demand for his trust fund into a reasonable request for family financial planning. "I can't believe they're doing this," I told Michael as I showed him a particularly nasty message from my Aunt Caroline, calling me heartless for hoarding money my son no longer needed. Michael took my phone and gently set it aside. "You don't need to read these. They don't know what happened, and they don't deserve explanations." I wished I could adopt his certainty, but a lifetime of conditioning made me doubt myself. Had I overreacted? Was I being unreasonable? Those doubts evaporated 3 days later when our attorney, James Porter, called to inform us that my parents had actually consulted a lawyer about contesting the trust. "They don't have a case," James assured us. "The trust was established with ironclad terms. As Ethan's parents and the designated trustees after his passing, you and Michael have sole discretion over those funds. But I wanted you to be aware they're exploring options." The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds that had barely begun to scab over. Not content with emotional manipulation, my parents were now attempting legal strong-arming to access money that had been meant for Ethan's future, a future cruelly stolen by cancer. Michael was incensed. "They're willing to drag us through legal proceedings while we're grieving our son? That's it. I'm done with them." We instructed James to send a formal cease and desist letter, making it clear that any further legal action would be met with countersuit for harassment and infliction of emotional distress. It was the language of business and law, clinical and detached, applied to what should have been the most personal of relationships. The letter worked, in that my parents backed off legally. But the fallout within the extended family intensified. People took sides, with many believing my parents' carefully crafted narrative about their heartbroken attempt to preserve family unity being rebuffed by their grief-crazed daughter. Some relatives stopped speaking to us entirely. Others, like my cousin Rachel, reached out privately after hearing my side of the story, horrified by my parents' behavior. "I had no idea they skipped the funeral," Rachel said during a tearful phone call. "Aunt Diana told everyone they were there supporting you the whole time." "I'm so sorry, Stephanie." These ripples of support amid the sea of judgment provided small comfort as we navigated the already overwhelming process of grief. Some days, I could barely get out of bed, let alone defend myself against family politics. Michael acted as my shield, filtering messages and calls, responding when necessary, and creating space for me to mourn without additional burdens. His parents remained our steadfast allies, never once mentioning the trust fund except to reassure us that we should take whatever time we needed to decide its purpose. About a month after the confrontation, I found myself sitting in Ethan's room, finally ready to begin the painful process of sorting through his belongings. In his desk drawer, I discovered a small journal with dinosaurs on the cover, a gift from his art therapist during hospital stays. With trembling hands, I opened it, finding pages filled with a 7-year-old's handwriting and drawings. Some entries were silly observations about hospital food or nurses he liked. Others contained wisdom that stole my breath. One page in particular stopped me cold. "When I grow up, I want to be a doctor who helps kids like me. Not just with medicine but with special toys and games that make the hospital less scary. I told Mom and Dad I'm saving my money for doctor school. Grandma Elizabeth says my trust fund will help me do big things someday." I called Michael, my voice breaking as I read him the entry. That night, we made a decision about Ethan's trust. The next morning, we contacted James to establish the Ethan Williams Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Support, allocating $500,000 of the trust to fund research, comfort items for hospitalized children, and support services for families facing the financial burden of long-term treatment. We also set up a scholarship in Ethan's name at his elementary school, focused on supporting children interested in science and medicine, $250,000 to ensure it would continue in perpetuity. The remaining $100,000 we reserved, unsure yet of its purpose but knowing Ethan would want us to help others in meaningful ways. With these decisions made, I felt something shift inside me, not healing exactly, but purpose emerging from pain. Ethan's short life would continue to matter through the lives he would help even after his death. I wrote a letter to my parents and Brittany, detailing our decisions about the trust and explicitly asking for no further contact. The letter was not angry, just final, a boundary drawn with the clarity that only profound loss can bring. "Ethan's legacy will help children fighting the battle he lost," I wrote. "I believe this honors who he was and who he was becoming. I hope someday you understand that this was never about money, but about respect for his memory and the values we taught him, compassion, generosity, and thinking of others before himself." I sent the letter certified mail so I would know when they received it. 3 days later, my phone rang with my father's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Surely we can reach a compromise," he said without preamble. $50,000 for the wedding. That's all Brittany needs for the venue deposit and dress. You'd still have $800,000 for whatever charity projects you want." I felt strangely calm as I replied, "There will be no compromise. Goodbye, Dad." Then I blocked his number, along with my mother's and Brittany's. That evening, as Michael and I sat on our back porch watching the stars emerge, something we'd done countless times with Ethan, I felt a weight lift. Not the crushing burden of grief, that would remain. But the exhausting weight of seeking approval from people incapable of giving it. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" I asked Michael, watching the first star appear in the darkening sky. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I think you're honoring Ethan and protecting yourself. Both are exactly right. I nodded, focusing on the growing constellation above us. Somewhere in that vast expanse was Ethan's energy, transformed but eternal. And here on Earth was his legacy, about to help children we would never meet but whose lives would be better because our son had lived. 6 months passed, marking the half-year anniversary of Ethan's death with a quiet day of remembrance. Michael and I visited his grave, placing fresh flowers and a small model of the Mars rover he had been so fascinated by. We sat on the grass beside the headstone, sharing memories, and sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. Grief, I had learned, doesn't move in a straight line toward resolution. It circles back, ambushes you in moments of apparent calm, recedes only to surge again when triggered by a birthday card display or a child laughing with the exact cadence of Ethan's laugh. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the crushing weight began to shift into something I could carry without being completely flattened. Individual therapy gave me tools to process both the loss of my son and the family dynamics that had culminated in such a painful rupture. Couples therapy helped Michael and I navigate our different grieving styles and ensure our bond remained strong when everything else felt fragile. Through it all, we maintained complete radio silence with my parents and Brittany. It wasn't vengeful or punitive, simply a necessary boundary that allowed healing to begin. Sometimes the healthiest thing to do with toxic relationships is to end them, a lesson that had taken me far too long to learn. Occasionally, information filtered through via mutual connections. I learned that Brittany had indeed gotten married, though in a ceremony significantly more modest than her original plans. She and Ryan had honeymooned in the Bahamas rather than the month-long European tour she'd envisioned. I felt nothing upon hearing this, neither satisfaction nor regret, which I counted as progress. In late spring, Elizabeth called with news that both thrilled and terrified me. The first phase of renovations for the Ethan Williams Pediatric Cancer Wing at Memorial Hospital was complete. The formal dedication was scheduled for the following month, and as the foundation's founders, Michael and I were expected to attend. "Are you ready for this?" Michael asked that night as we discussed the invitation. "We can delay if you need more time." I considered his question carefully. The hospital held complicated associations, the sight of Ethan's suffering but also where so many had fought alongside us with such compassion. "I think I am," I replied. "It feels right to see his name helping other children." He would have loved that. The week before the dedication, I discovered something that sent me spiraling into a complex emotional state. I was pregnant. The timing was pure coincidence, we hadn't been trying but hadn't prevented it either. Life asserting itself in the wake of death felt both miraculous and somehow disloyal, though I knew intellectually that Ethan would have been ecstatic about a sibling. I told Michael by placing the positive test on his pillow. When he found it, his expression transformed from confusion to wonder to concern as he looked at me. "Are you okay with this?" he asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm happy and sad and terrified all at once." "Is that wrong?" He gathered me in his arms. "It's perfectly right. All of it." We decided to keep the news private until after the first trimester, allowing ourselves space to process before navigating others' reactions. The only exceptions were Michael's parents, whose joy was tempered with understanding of our complicated emotions. The day of the hospital wing dedication arrived with perfect June weather. The ceremony would be held in the new outdoor healing garden that had been designed with input from former pediatric patients. As we prepared to leave, I found myself standing in Ethan's room, which we had preserved largely as he left it. "I'm doing something important today," I told his absent presence. "I hope you'd be proud." The dedication ceremony was both harder and more healing than I'd anticipated. Seeing Ethan's name on the building brought fresh tears, but watching current patients explore the new child-friendly spaces, with treatment rooms designed to look like spaceships and underwater caves rather than sterile medical facilities, filled me with purpose. I was scheduled to give brief remarks. Standing at the podium, looking out at the gathered hospital staff, donors, and families currently battling what we had lost, I felt Ethan's presence more strongly than I had since his death. "My son Ethan was many things," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion. a dinosaur expert, a future astronaut, a builder of elaborate Lego cities. But most fundamentally, he was kind. Even in his hardest moments, he worried about other children who were scared or in pain. This wing honors not just his memory but his heart, his desire to make difficult experiences better for others. Every child who finds comfort here is part of Ethan's legacy, and for that, our family is profoundly grateful. As the applause washed over me, I noticed a figure at the back of the gathering that made my heart stutter, Brittany, standing alone and uncertain. After the ceremony concluded and while Michael was engaged in conversation with hospital administrators, I made my way to where she still lingered. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said, neither welcoming nor dismissive. She looked different, less polished, more genuine somehow. "I saw the announcement in the paper," she explained, fidgeting with her purse strap. "I didn't tell Mom and Dad I was coming." I waited, unsure of her purpose in attending. "What you did with the money," she continued hesitantly. "It's really amazing. These kids. I had no idea what it was like for them." "For Ethan. You never visited him to find out," I replied, the words coming out more sharply than intended. She winced but nodded. "I deserve that. I was selfish and awful. The wedding, asking for his money. I don't know how to apologize enough for any of it." I studied my sister's face, searching for the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to detecting. Instead, I found what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Why now?" I asked. "Honestly? Marriage isn't what I expected. Ryan and I are struggling. He says I'm spoiled and self-centered, and when I started to argue, he asked me about Ethan, about why I never visited my dying nephew but expected everyone to celebrate me." She swallowed hard. I didn't have an answer that didn't make me sound horrible. It wasn't my responsibility to absolve Brittany or help her marriage. Yet something in her vulnerability reminded me of the little sister who had once followed me around before our parents' favoritism had warped our relationship beyond recognition. "I can't fix things between us overnight," I said carefully. "A lot of trust has been broken." "I know," she replied quickly. "I'm not asking for that. I just wanted you to know I see what you did here, and it's beautiful. Ethan deserved better from all of us." As she turned to leave, I made a split-second decision. "Brittany? If you want to get coffee sometime, just us, no parents involved, I might be open to that." Her eyes widened with surprise and cautious hope. "I'd like that," she said softly. I watched her walk away, feeling neither reconciled nor closed off, simply open to possibility in a way I hadn't been before. Whether anything would come of this encounter remained to be seen, but it felt like a step toward something healthier than the complete severance of family ties. My boundaries with my parents remained firm. They had made no genuine attempts at understanding or amends, continuing to frame themselves as victims of my unreasonable behavior. Some relationships cannot and should not be salvaged, particularly when they consistently undermine your well-being. In August, we learned we were having a daughter. After much consideration, we decided to name her Lyra, after the constellation Ethan had loved most. Michael's parents wept when we told them, understanding the significance immediately. "A star for our star-loving boy," Elizabeth said, holding my hand. "Perfect." Lyra arrived in January, on a clear night when the stars were particularly bright. As I held her for the first time, I felt both the enduring ache of Ethan's absence and the fierce joy of new life, not replacing what was lost but adding to what remained. By Lyra's first birthday, the Ethan Williams Foundation had funded research leading to a promising new treatment protocol for the type of leukemia that had taken our son. The scholarship had supported 3 elementary students with science camp experiences. And the hospital wing had served hundreds of children, with feedback showing significantly reduced anxiety and trauma compared to traditionally designed treatment facilities. On the anniversary of Ethan's death each year, we hosted a community memorial that grew from a small gathering of friends to a well-attended event raising additional funds for the foundation. Children released biodegradable lanterns into the night sky while parents held each other close, understanding all too well the fragility of the gift they'd been given. My relationship with Brittany evolved slowly into something resembling genuine sisterhood. She attended Lyra's birth and became a devoted aunt, perhaps trying to atone for her failure with Ethan. While we never discussed our parents in depth, I gathered from occasional comments that she too had established firmer boundaries with them, recognizing patterns she didn't want to repeat in her own life. As for Michael and me, grief changed us both individually and as a couple. There were still days when sadness overwhelmed everything else. There were still triggers that could send me spiraling back into the darkest moments. But increasingly, there were also days of genuine joy, of presence, of gratitude for what remained and what had grown from our deepest pain. 3 years after losing Ethan, I stood in our backyard watching Lyra toddle after fireflies as Michael set up the telescope for our weekly stargazing. The Ethan Williams Foundation had just received a major grant to expand its programs nationally. My latest check-in with Dr. Chen had confirmed that several of her current patients were benefiting from treatment protocols our funding had helped develop. "Mommy." "Stars?" Lyra called, pointing upward with the same wonder her brother had shown. "Yes, baby," I replied, lifting her into my arms. "The stars are out tonight." Michael joined us, wrapping his arms around us both as we gazed upward at the vast expanse of light. "Do you think he knows?" I asked softly. "About all of it, Lyra, the foundation, everything?" Michael kissed the top of my head. "I think he does. I think energy really does transform, not disappear. And Ethan had more energy than most." I smiled, feeling the weight of grief and the lightness of love occupying the same space in my heart, no longer in opposition but intertwined, each giving meaning to the other. Family, I had learned, isn't always bound by blood. Sometimes it's formed through love, through shared pain, through choosing each other every day even when it's hard. Sometimes it's built in the absence of what should have been but wasn't. And sometimes, it's found in the stars, where a little boy's legacy continues to shine, guiding us toward greater compassion, stronger boundaries, and deeper love than we ever thought possible. If you've ever had to create boundaries with toxic family members or found yourself healing from family betrayal, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Did you eventually reconcile, or was maintaining distance the healthier choice? Remember to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the family we choose is more valuable than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find your own stars to guide you through dark nights.